Hi, I'm Daniel Fisher here at Sweetwater Sound, and today I have both the Grandmother semi-modular analog synthesizer and the Matriarch semi-modular analog synthesizer, both from Moog. And with the Matriarch now finally released, we're getting a lot of questions from our customers about which one might be right for them. And so today I'm not going to do a whole lot of sounds except just showing you certain differences. It's more about just discussing why one might be better than the other. If you really want to hear in-depth details about each of the parameters, go to our existing videos, and there's another deep dive video on the Matriarch coming out. So, first of all, what makes them similar? So, they have the identical oscillators. They're all 921 oscillators from the famous Moog modular synths. And they both have this very cool feature in that their main modulation LFO is actually another Moog full range oscillator. So, even though you have two oscillators here, you can actually drive it from key tracking and have a third oscillator. So you can hit one note and have 3-note chords, very much like on a Model D. Now this one has 4 oscillators, and you can still also drive the modulation LFO into audio frequencies and have it track perfectly. You can fine tune it and everything. Probably one of the main differences is that this is primarily a monophonic keyboard. It's for one note at a time. You can use 2 or 3 oscillators if you use the LFO to get big fat lead sounds, big fat bass sounds, lots of effects and everything else. But you really can't do chords other than making a 3-note chord by setting the pitch differences. On the Matriarch, you've got 4 oscillators that act much more independently if you want them to. There's a voice mode that lets me go from 1 voice to 2 voice to 4 voice, and that changes how it plays. And to be clear, this is not 4 voices of true polyphony, in that each note is independent and they each have their own filters and like that. It's not that, but it does let you play 4-note chords and you can move the pitches around. So what other differences are there? Well, the Grandmother has a spring reverb, and the Matriarch, instead of the reverb, has a stereo delay, and it's a true analog stereo delay, and it's really 2 separate analog delays. So it allows you to do things like ping pong, but it also lets you do any kind of spacing between left and right because they are independent, and so you can independently control feedback and their time. It can be synced to clock. It's really exciting stuff. If you like delays, this is definitely a plus. So another thing to consider is for the Grandmother is if you're just looking for a synth that you can quickly reach up and start doing things, clearly the Grandmother is easier to grasp at a first glance, you know? And the color scheme, although some people, have differing opinions on the color scheme, it really does force you to see via the colored buttons, via the colors on the panels on the back. It lets you see which buttons control which sections, and it also just sort of helps you see this as individual sections of modules that really are truly modules. So on the Matriarch, obviously there are more things, even on things that sort of look the same, like the ARP and sequencer. They're both similar in that they can have 256-note sequences, and their arpeggiator's pretty much the same, but this one can store 4 notes per sequence because you can have 4 separate oscillators. This only stores 1 note per sequence. And because of this 4-position sequence knob, you can actually have 12 sequences, and those are 12 sequences of 256 notes each with 4 notes per step. You've also got control over rest, tie, and ratchet, which just helps you make your sequences a lot more interesting. And there are just lots more utilities here where you can do your more mults. You have 2 sets of attenuators. You obviously have more things on your mixer because you have more oscillators. And the filters, that's definitely a difference. So on this filter, you've got a low-pass filter with resonance and envelope control. And you do have a static high-pass filter. In other words, you can put something in and roll off the bass, but you can't move that high-pass filter around via control voltages. Where on this one, you've got your high-pass built into this filter section here, and it's really two filters. So you can have a high pass and a low pass, either in parallel or in series, or run them in stereo and have a low pass for one type of sound and an entirely different low pass for a different sound, and you can move them independently via control voltages. Another thing that's different on the Matriarch is that you have two envelope generators. Up on the Grandmother, you have one envelope generator, and then by using the VCA mode, like right there, I just did a drone, all right? Or I can just have a standard release that acts kind of the way you would expect it to when you let go of the keyboard, or do you want your volume to follow the same exact envelope that the filter's following? If it's really important to you that you have both envelopes, then you gotta go with the Matriarch. But I find you could do an awful lot this way, and I didn't often find myself wishing, oh geez, I really wish I had two envelopes. It really is a complete unit here. And obviously on both of them, the possibilities of what you can do when you string them up with cables, and then when you start connecting them, well, the song I did on the opening, I did a little cheat here. I took the output of the Grandmother and ran it into the second channel of the stereo delay because they can't act independently. And then, just to be insane, I took the output of that and ran it into the spring reverb. So I've actually got a feedback loop from the Grandmother to the Matriarch back to the Grandmother. And by adjusting these two attenuators, I was able to get a nice fat ambience without actually going into full oscillation feedback. So I'm going to take a pair of sawtooth slightly detuned and go into the spring reverb and just let you hear some of the flavor of it. It is not quite like any other spring reverb I've heard. It has a very unique quality. It has a certain fatness and it has a certain frequency response that's definitely different from any other spring reverb you've tried. And it is definitely sensitive to physical motions. I mean, you know, if I hit it, you can hear it. And if you're live and it's very loud, it's going to trigger that. That should be a consideration for why you might want a Matriarch. If you're in more quiet, controlled environments and you just love spring, and a lot of people have been asking for a real spring for a long time, then I get why you'd want it. So I'm going to bring the volume up on that. And now I'll play a little arpeggiation through it. So now we're going to try the stereo delay on the Matriarch. And like I said, it's two separate analog stereo delays. They're each 700 milliseconds, and they're fully controllable for their feedback, their time, and then there's a knob called spacing that lets you adjust the ratio of the left time versus right time, and that gives you all kinds of rhythmic variations. The way I like to use it, though, is I hit the ping pong button, which puts each of them in a ping pong mode. But if both of them are getting the same signal in ping pong, it actually doesn't sound stereo because they're crossing over each other. So the little secret trick on the Matriarch delay is put a blank plug into one of the two inputs, and then you will get that standard delay that ping pongs. So now I'm going to just mess with delay time and spacing and feedback. And if I hand adjust that to certain things, I can create rhythms, very interesting rhythms based on the arpeggiator. And if I want it exact, I can hit the sync button, and now my time knob is actually unit of the beat against the clock that's driving the arpeggiator. So another consideration is how much you're using the keyboard to control other things. Because while they both send out note information via MIDI, via control voltages, you're also getting aftertouch and velocity and gate and pitch. And there's even, like I said, an expression in where you put a TRS 1/4 inch expression jack in, and then you get those voltages coming out via the 3.5 millimeter jack. So this is definitely a much more serious controller than this one. But honestly, if you're just playing lead lines, or you're just playing bass notes, or you're just doing arpeggiations or sequences to control something else, you might not need all that. And that's really one of the key differences, is just how much complexity do you need? You know, a lot of people just want a simple synth that has really good oscillators into a mixer with some noise, a really good low-pass filter. You got that simple high-pass filter that you can just cut off as much bass as you want statically. A single envelope that can either run the filters and the amps, or you throw the switch and the amp now has a different release time. Or you could turn the amp to drone so the amp's always on. You can do nice ambient stuff like that. Down here, again, this is more about, I want the complexity. I'm looking for how many possible ways can I do something. So, for example, you can divvy up on the modulation. You can make it only do oscillators 1 and 3, or oscillators 2 and 4, or all of them. Why is that important? Well, it really becomes important when you're doing sync, and you can be sweeping some oscillators that are synced, and you get that very cool oscillator sync sound, but the main oscillators are standing stable. So that's one of the many things. And just again, because there's 90 patch points versus 41, there's just so much more you can do. There are more utilities, such as the mults. You have a pair of mults where you have the one here. You have 2 attenuators where you have one here. And again, you get that extra simple LFO that's just a triangle or a square out with voltage control of rate as well as manual control of rate. Okay, so now I want to show you just quickly the 2 oscillators. They are identical. There may be some slight sonic differences because you line up a bunch of Moogs, they're all going to sound slightly different, but you'll hear they're really close. So here are 2 oscillators slightly out of tune, 2 oscillators, I tried my best to get them the same amount out of tune, same volume, and here we go. And so depending on where I hit the key, where the phasing was, it might have started bright and gone dark, or might have started dark and gone bright. But I hit them enough times, I think you'll hear they're the same oscillator. So now I'm going into the low pass filter of the Grandmother. I'm going to start high and sweep low. And that's with no resonance. Same here. now we'll sweep upward we'll do resonance at about 9 o'clock. And now I'm going to go to the Matriarch, and because that has two filters, and one can be high pass, one can be low pass, I'm still in the mode where they're both low pass, but I have the spacing knob. So now I'm going to move the filter cutoff center slightly different for one side than the other, and you'll hear kind of a phasey difference. And notice that that really affects the stereo field as well, because one of the filters is hard left, the other is hard right. So you put an LFO or an envelope on that, and you get this really nice natural phase sound that's just beautiful. Now I'll do the high pass, low pass, which is definitely a different sound. Now they're in series, so the high pass is doing its cutting, the low pass is doing its cutting. And as I turn resonance up, you'll hear that even more. And now watch what happens as I play with the spacing. Now, that's very, very cool. Why would you not want that? Well, if you're live and you just want a synthesizer that you know how to go and adjust the oscillators, grab the filter, have a good time, when there's just only one filter, you don't have to be thinking about what mode it's in and what's going to the left and what's going to the right and how spacing works and everything else. You just grab the filter and work it. However, if you're more complex in your performance techniques and you really want that sort of thing, then obviously go for this. So now I'm going to do parallel, and you'll hear the high pass in one side and the low pass hard to the other side. And again with even more resonance. So of course, the high pass, low pass in parallel combination, where you got one on one side, one on the other, sounds really good when you go into the true stereo analog delay, because now each of the filter types is getting its own ping pong delay, because I have the ping pong on. So here we go with that. So those are some of the differences between the Grandmother and the Matriarch. Clearly, they both sound really good. They've got that big, fat, monstrous sound, which is why you buy a Moog in the first place. It's just that this one's bigger. It has more panels. It has more connection points. It has two more oscillators. It has a second filter. It has a second envelope. It has the true stereo delay, but this has the reverb. It's easier to place somewhere, and of course, it costs less. If you have any further questions about either the Grandmother or the Matriarch, please contact your Sweetwater sales engineer. My name is Daniel Fisher. Thank you very much for watching.